We find ourselves in mid-September, and the 2 weeks to flatten the curve has turned into several months. Is the curve flattened? It seems to be flattened, and yet the restrictions are still in place. Americans are beginning to push back. Recently, there have been demonstrations in Target stores of people removing their masks and encouraging others to do so. A group of worshipers held church in a Walmart about a month ago. A federal judge in Pennsylvania has ruled that the lockdowns are unconstitutional, and a lawsuit in Ohio is asking for damages for businesses that have suffered loss due to the lockdowns. Ken is not with us today, but Don and I have a lot to say, as usual. So, Don, would you give us your perspective on some of this pushback?
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, I think it's exciting. We're really seeing traction happening on the ground, so to speak, across America and across the world. I believe all of this has been gamed out. By that I mean that the President Trump Patriot team worldwide has expected the COVID hysteria to basically unravel and people to get fed up with it. It's kind of like the strategy is the short attention spans can't be manipulated for a long period of time. So the very thing that the enemy has engineered is actually being turned against them. And people have forgotten all of this scary death stuff because they haven't had anything but numbers and pundits and the little scratching of the surface that happens. You find out, well, the hospitals weren't actually filled and it really wasn't what it turned out to be. And whether you want to call it a scam or not, because that caused problems because people really died, and there really is something that happens with what appears to be a virus. So, but the idea is it wore out, and I think that was planned. The enemy of patriots worldwide had no other plan than to play this probably earlier than they wanted to. So here we are and on the ground, and people are waking up, and by that I mean they see that this isn't what it's purported to be, and they don't want to live in fear. So it took a while for that to kick in, but it is kicking in, and that's exciting. And I believe that is part of the strategy. Now, it's only a piece of the strategy, but it is something to get excited about. And there's a lot of knowledge that needs to happen at the grassroots level in order for the full plan to be more fully engaged. We don't really just want people in Walmarts or people, in the streets or whatever that are upset about masks. We need a higher level of education in order for the agenda of Patriots, a Trump team, to be fully engaged with getting back America. But we've got a starting point, and that's exciting. So I'll get into a little bit more of the details later about where my hope that all of this is headed, and it does have to do with our enslavement to the global central banking system, and how is that going to be unraveled, and the people taking back their economic system, and with full cooperation and to some degree greater understanding at the grassroots level. I'm excited that we're headed in that direction.
We definitely are, I would say, and you mentioned that the president probably wants people to get fed up. I think people are getting fed up, and that is evidenced particularly by the lawsuit filed in Ohio and the actions of even some gyms in New Jersey. There's been quite a bit of pushback there. So I'd like to just focus a little bit on the lawsuit filed in Ohio by reading some of what John Rappaport, who does excellent work, has written about the lawsuit.
Yeah, great. And one of the things that I that really grabbed me about that whole Ohio lawsuit. Number one, it's statewide. A lot of the other lawsuits that are beginning now are more localized, so that's exciting in itself. But it's also um, being funded by donations at the grassroots level. It's not somebody with deep pockets, and although that's fine as long as they're patriots, of course, but the fact that it's being funded by many people across an entire state is very encouraging.
This is what John Rappaport wrote. This case in the current climate should provoke intense interest from the public and from every lawyer within hailing distance. Here is the impressive opening salvo in the court filing. Quote, "In recent months, entire states have been imprisoned without due process and with the clear threat to impose such lockdowns again. Interstate travel has been severely restricted. Privacy rights have been devastated. Numerous business takings without compensation, and many regulations being implemented without statutory process requirements under the guise of a health emergency that is roughly as dangerous as a seasonal influenza outbreak. The plaintiffs in this case have all been injured in various capacities by these unconstitutional actions, and without action by the court, will be left without redress. More terrifying, without action by the court will be setting future precedent that will allow states to withhold fundamental constitutional rights in violation of U.S. Supreme Court precedent, circumventing the various levels of scrutiny applied to such rights, and justify such actions under public health emergency orders, without subjecting those orders to any real review. Just trust the bureaucrats because they are the experts." End quote. Here is the most important point. Quote, "We humbly ask the court in this case to recognize that the political process and operative orders are invalid if based on false or misleading information, and recognize the criticality that all future emergency orders be based and maintained on clear, honest facts, particularly when such orders are infringing on constitutional rights." End quote. John Rappaport further wrote, "Facts matter. Actual science matters. Reasons why an emergency is declared matter. People can't be locked down and restrained from earning a living and having contact with other humans simply because a state authority decides to issue such orders. If this case goes to trial, the door will open to the presentation of fact and science. Attorney Renz for the plaintiffs is well aware of this, and his filing is studded with bold and accurate claims of fact, such as, quote, "According to recent data from the Ohio COVID-19 dashboard, we can see that the spike in cases is actually just a spike in testing. The state went from a few thousand tests per day to 25,000 tests per day. The positivity rate for COVID-19 has remained fairly steady, but there have been more tests." End quote. Further, quote, "When the emergency was declared, we heard a daily drumbeat about the danger and deaths related to COVID-19. Now that the case fatality rate has been shown to be roughly the same as the yearly flu, those death numbers are simply not scary to the public. As a result, the state sees no impact from talking about fatalities and has instead begun testing more, so they could tell us there are more cases. The PCR tests are generally viewed as the means of determining if a patient has COVID-19. The problem is that the inventor of the PCR test, who won a Nobel Prize in chemistry for the invention, specifically stated that the test was not well suited to and never designed to diagnose disease. Much has been made about this in the press and elsewhere, but the reason there are issues with PCR testing in relation to COVID is that PCR testing cannot detect how much of a virus exists in a person. Exposure of the existence of incomplete traces of a virus do not mean a person is infected with a disease, which is part of the reason the PCR tests have an elevated rate of false positives. There is not even a true standard for testing. Instead, we have numerous tests from numerous vendors that may or may not have a similar standard for what it means to, quote, have, end quote, COVID-19. The CDC, governor, and ODH know this, so they have allowed for the diagnosis of cases based on as meaningless criteria as a cough in a community in which COVID supposedly exists, end quote.
John Rappaport, who is an excellent researcher, especially with regard to health matters and the abuse of the healthcare system by the bureaucrats, and he really gave very high marks to this lawsuit when he looked into it and just discovered exactly what the lawsuit involved. In other words, these attorneys really have their ducks in a row. They understand the liberty issues. They understand that the tyranny disguises itself in terms of safety and protecting the people, and they're not being bamboozled by that. They're basically, the attorneys are demanding dangerous liberty over peaceful slavery, and that's a good thing.
The lockdowns have been incredibly disruptive to business, as we learned a few weeks ago when we interviewed Joe from upstate New York, who's a business consultant. And there have been other lawsuits filed. 1,500 New York gyms go to court in a bid to reopen. I have another article, Gym Owners to Newsmax TV, totally safe to operate and not spread COVID-19. And a New Jersey gym that defied coronavirus lockdown had its license rescinded. One can understand why business people become frustrated enough to file these kinds of lawsuits.
Especially in situations like California. Of course, we're not saying there's a lawsuit there, but there sure is grounds for one, because apparently the state-funded gyms that service the state employees are allowed to open, but the private gyms that are open to the public aren't. So that's certainly ripe for a lawsuit.
When I think a question that begs to be answered is, what is the real purpose of the lockdowns? Are they effectively helping the citizens of these states?
There's a principle that I see operating here, and that's that that propaganda, and I'll put this, think for a minute that this is some kind of a propaganda operation going on here, that this isn't what it appears to be on the surface. And one of the functions of propaganda isn't actually to convince people that the version of the truth that they're being told by the media is true. They're basically what they're actually doing is giving people an excuse not to exercise their personal liberties or personal freedom, and they're giving them a reason to abdicate. If the media or the government had just say, roll over, we're taking this over, everybody would be up in arms. But because they're given a plausible excuse, the people who want an excuse not to get involved and to trust the government because they know best, they're given reason to do that. There's this excellent quote by Michael Rivero, who I used to listen to. I'm not sure if he's still around on YouTube and stuff, but this quote puts it very well. He says, "Most people prefer to believe that their leaders are just and fair, even in the face of evidence to the contrary, because once a citizen acknowledges that the government under which he lives is lying and corrupt, the citizen has to choose what he or she will do about it. To take action in the face of corrupt government entails risks of harm to life and loved ones. To choose to do nothing is to surrender one's self-image of standing for principles. Most people do not have the courage to face that choice. Hence, most propaganda is not designed to fool the critical thinker, but only to give moral cowards an excuse not to think at all.
That is an interesting quote. And one thing that I have been thinking a lot recently, just having heard some employers state that their employees are not willing to come back to work, and people seem to use the virus as an excuse to just not do things that they don't want to do. There's a proverb in the Bible that says, "The sluggard says there is a lion outside," or "I will be murdered in the streets." In other words, if someone just doesn't want to live life, they might welcome an excuse why they don't have to. And I suspect that the virus has actually been that for some people. And I think maybe it was beneficial. I think so many Americans have adrenal burnout that I think it may have even been very beneficial in very early spring, late winter, for people to stay at home with their families. And I saw some benefits of that in various places. But now that this has gone on for this long, I think it's very disruptive to most people to be outside of their routines. And whether we like it or not, most humans are creatures of habit. And now that routines have been disrupted and people aren't in their everyday habit, if people are still not back to work, not getting up in the morning, going to work, going through their normal routine, I think it creates a kind of void or vacuum in which some people might benefit, some people might become more refined, and other people might just go to the lowest common denominator and say, hey, if these other people aren't working, I'm not going to work either, and just do exactly what this proverb says. The sluggard says there's a lion outside. I can't go outside. I can't do anything. I might get coronavirus. I'm scared. It becomes a convenient excuse for people, I think.
What we really need is a meme of a lion that looks like coronavirus or that is labeled coronavirus in the streets so that the sluggard can talk to him.
Well, this is a flaw in human nature, I think, and that that if we aren't compelled by something, there's also a proverb that says a workman's appetite drives him on. Unfortunately, if some people are receiving benefits, they might just tend to stay at home and not want to work. And Don, I think I've heard you state that is kind of a creeping form of socialism that's being tested on the American people.
Yeah, I've said that before on this show that and there's memes about that we've got instant socialism because of a virus, and there's no doubt in my mind that that was the plan. And of course, those that are aware and awake of political systems know that socialism is not something beneficial. Americans that love liberty know that it's basically it's not a way to get the rich to pay more money. The rich already pay the lion's share of the government financing, and whenever you raise taxes too far, they'll just find out ways to avoid them. So it's really a way for the wealthy elites to get the government agenda because they become the managerial class of the government, and the people who have their needs taken care of them become less responsible, and they become the puppets really of the ruling class. And that's the situation we've gotten ourselves into as Americans today, is we've let that happen to us. The America was founded because our forebears came from Europe and wanted to escape the corruption that was there. The Pilgrims founded their colony not because they wanted to have slavery, but because they wanted to have freedom of religion because the state was controlling religion. And there were other groups for various reasons, many of which were religious and many for other reasons, but basically due to oppressive government. So now, here in this situation today, we think that the the government is the people, and therefore, because we vote, this is all us that's running the show. Well, anyone that's been paying attention knows that's not the case anymore. Unfortunately, there were a lot of people that were fooled by the Obama administration as being of the people when it was really a clever facade. So we've still got people in that camp that are demonizing President Trump, and I personally can't wait for their all their excuses to be blown to smithereens, so that the reality that they've believed in is no longer tenable, because the tension is excruciating now between those that see what's going on and understand the strategy that Trump is deploying to get America back firing on all cylinders, and seeing through this deep state veneer that includes COVID-19 and that whole virus thing. That's not the only piece of it, but then there's a lot of moving parts to this, and most of them don't make the news because the news doesn't want to broach the subject, doesn't want to get into the ground of what Trump is really doing behind the scenes. So all that the Democrat loyalists know about is Trump plays too much golf and says a lot of mean things. So that's their understanding of reality. And they would prefer, in many ways, to have the peaceful, encroaching socialism because they think, well, socialism is just where the people have their needs taken care of them, and they like public libraries and stuff like that. So we've got a lot of naive people, and this wake-up alarm bell that's about to ring. I'm hopeful that it's going to ring before the election, but a big part of it might hold off until after the election. We shall see.
There do seem to be a lot of agendas at play, and one of them that we have learned of is from X22 report. Dave stated that he believes that part of the reason the deep state want to keep whatever schools closed as possible is so that the students can continue to participate in demonstrations, protests, also known as riots. And I have a couple of articles. The first one is Gateway Pundit. Wealthy New York college student arrested at BLM riots after causing $100,000 in damages to Manhattan businesses. And interestingly enough, from June, a Forbes article that is quite, it really takes a point of view of liberal ideals, but states in June how student activism shaped the Black Lives Matter movement. And the article outlines how crucial students have been in this summer's demonstrations. So there are so many agendas at play that it's very difficult to sort things out in many cases.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed is that everything that Trump and Team Patriot do is counterpunching. So what happens is that the deep state and their street thugs will do one particular action, and of course, in that same category, I'm sorry, but a lot of the healthcare workers don't know it, but they're operating in that regard. They are, there's a lot of good doctors, but they're forced to comply with regulations, and a lot of these hospitals were not available for regular use because they were expecting this groundswell of COVID cases that never materialized to the extent that it was predicted. So you've got a lot of these people that are forming this onslaught, this surge, this deep state pushback against Trump and his agenda, whether it's rallies or whether it's the economy in many forms. But what happens almost invariably after that, it can be weeks later, and it's often not covered by the news, but you'll get the pushback of these things like these lawsuits, or you'll get the lawsuits against the COVID shutdown, where Americans who understand liberty are changing these regulations one by one, or mounting a case against them so that this can't happen again. And this has to happen. This is what I believe is the strategy that Trump is employing. It's not only about getting people riled up in the way that the left accuses him of. It's not about primarily even motivating the base, although that's a part of it. The main agenda here is to get the deep state to emphasize whatever regulations they need to carry out their tyranny, and then Trump behind the scenes will engineer executive orders, or patriots, in the case of this situation in Ohio, will form a grassroots operation of legal operation in order to get the liberties back. So this needs to happen. David X22, who is fond of saying sometimes the people must be shown, and the reason that they must be shown, and of course that comes from Q Team, but people must be shown so that they are become awakened out of this naive trust in government that we were lulled into from the previous administrations. And I'm going back all the way to, from Reagan and earlier, that Americans have just basically accepted the direction that supposedly well-meaning people have tried to take their government. And one example is what has happened in Tulsa. Now, this I think is still ongoing, but that was, of course, the place where Trump held one of his first post-COVID rallies, and there was the accusation that there was a surge in coronavirus cases because of the rally that he held there. And now Trump is holding other rallies, but they're not getting this kind of pushback. At least we don't expect that there will be. And I believe that that's been managed because of what they learned from Tulsa. Now, there's even pushback in other areas in Tulsa because the population becomes awakened. And the article I'm looking at it here is Tulsa Black Lives Matter mural must be removed, the city councilors decide. So that kind of thing, I think, is happening because the dynamic here is the left, the Democrat loyalists to the deep state, overplay their hand, and the patriots get motivated at the grassroots level, not just to attend Trump rallies or to post about Trump on social media, but actually to get involved locally and make a difference, because there are deep state operations that are affecting their lives that they were not aware of before. So that's all to say the media is not going to tell you about this. The mainstream media is not going to tell you about the pushback that comes afterwards. But the fact that we're not seeing that happen in some of these other recent rallies, to the extent that it happened in Tulsa, well, that's a good sign. We're moving forward. And I believe that the patriots have to put out test cases like this and learn from them, and then learn the details of the enemy's game plan so that they can move forward. And I believe that's happening. So not to get discouraged, it's a necessary part of the process. I got to point out that, of course, that the whole diagnosis of, or those tests, the COVID tests are horribly flawed. They can basically be made to be whatever they want them to be based on the concentration of the level. It's a certain type of test that the person that developed the test said it should never be used for diagnosis.
It almost feels like something was, like there was some kind of a contrivance here, like something was planned because of just going on Twitter and today doing a search for and using the recent filter, doing a search for Tulsa coronavirus, and there are literally hundreds. I as I scrolled through, the only search returns that I found were accusations against Donald Trump for having the June rally and stating that he killed Herman Cain by having the rally. This feels to me like some kind of a contrivance in Tulsa, and Tulsa's kind of known for being representative of red state, and the feelings of the people there tend to be pretty supportive of President Trump.
And I'm sure that's one of the reasons why he wanted to have his first rally there, to have it be favorable ground. But I think one of the things that we learned, and I'm not saying it's a complete surprise to Trump team, because I think that they expected this to some extent, but that there would be this entrenched bureaucracy, even in very deep red areas. And we've experienced the culture in Tulsa, and it's extremely patriotic and grassroots, rural type, even in the metropolitan areas. It's just that same vibe is part of the city. So not 100%, but it's definitely a part of their culture. But the fact that the entrenched bureaucracy seemed to have this power to be able to steer events away from Trump, I think, was a testing of the waters that I'm guessing, and it is a guess, yielded some results that were hard data that has helped Trump team to adapt to the post-COVID rally procedures, so that they're not completely shut down and can move forward and know how to work behind the scenes so that the negative aspects of Tulsa don't happen again.
Well, and we know that a lot of what the left does, as you kind of stated earlier, is more about propaganda than reality. So if they can handpick a few select areas and a few select instances and make it appear as if something happened there, such as, an explosion of coronavirus numbers in Tulsa, that's all they want. They know that they can't actually alter reality. The only thing they can alter is perception. But it seems in some ways that they have kind of mastered that skill.
Yeah, and they've been working at this a long time, and that Michael Rivero quote really articulates it well, as propaganda does not appeal to critical thinkers. And a big part of the success of propaganda is to decrease the level of critical thinking ability in the general population. We have been dumbed down, and that's not by mistake. And education, so-called these days, has a lot to do with feelings and how we need to understand that we shouldn't offend people. Well, they've turned American culture on its head, and the idea of America being bold and freedom-loving, land of the free, the home of the brave. Well, has that been nurtured in our schools and by our educational system? I don't think so.
Don, you are one of the most knowledgeable people I know about the issue of color of law and constitutionality of law. Can you help us understand just a little bit of why what has been mandated, and in our title we called it Edicts, what has been mandated regarding coronavirus lockdowns and precautions that are not actually laws? Can you explain? I know there's been a state of emergency declared and some changes have been made due to that, but can you shed a little bit of light on the color of law and the concept of having unconstitutional regulations imposed on us?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. I like to put things in context, and that makes the whole picture more clear. I think, to more people. And this is a very important concept. It's because we're a show that's about psychology and how people are manipulated in order to fit into agendas and news narratives and to herd us into certain directions. Well, color of law is a major example of that, because people assume that laws are governing their behavior when in fact in many instances they are corporate regulations or internal policies, because the corporate world is so vast, it affects so much of our behavior. And that's a big part of the problem. And the left was on this a long time ago about the power of corporations, but sometimes you lose focus. And a lot of the mask mandates that we've personally noticed have to do with large big box stores, so-called, and you have to wear a mask to go in them. Well, they're corporate controlled. They're governed by a group that is basically under economic control and forced to behave in certain ways. So that's a part of the big picture, the context that I want to give us some bearings to try to understand. We in the United States have been led to believe that our government was under our complete control. Well, one big flaw with that, I mean, in other words, we think we're a government of, by, and for the people, as Lincoln famously said in the Gettysburg Address. Well, what's missing from that since the days of FDR is the banking system. And many people today do know about the private Federal Reserve, and that's a great thing. They understand that this is something that the people don't control. What we often fail to grasp is the extent of the control that gives the international global bankers in trying to set up a worldwide globalist system. And to me, the whole idea of globalism is directly tied to the banking system. So that's been building and growing since the days of FDR, when the agreement for the New Deal was that the American people's labor, the fruits of their labor, would be the surety for the national debt, meaning we were pledged as collateral, or our labor was. So through the entities they created for us to function under. Well, that's been removed from the power that of, by, and for the people would normally have. So we've been functioning in this world, in this never never land, where we think we have constitutional rights because the document hasn't changed, but in effect because of banking and everything needing money that's managed privately, meaning that whoever the private Federal Reserve wanted to pay off, they could, and then they would own them, and then those lawmakers would pass whatever they wanted to do. That now they had to sell it to the people first, and the people had to be dumbed down and kept asleep. And that's been a big part of the operation, is the control of media. Well, that's breaking free. That's breaking loose. And I'm talking ever since the days of Walter Cronkite, and that we all know as the most trusted man in America. That's when the big sales job began. Television made it possible. But the internet in its infancy, or say, let's say, mid maturity and in its teenage years, broke free from that. So we're in that period now. I believe that the plan was to lock down the internet, and they still attempt to do that through the fake news alerts on Facebook and stuff like that, but it's not working. And as many patriots now know, there was a plan that did not include President Trump to complete that operation and fully bring the new media, the internet media, under the control of that globalist system. Well, it didn't work because Trump got elected, and that was a popular movement. He has the support of the people. So the issue now is, helping the people to understand what getting their government back means. And it's not magic. There's all kinds of pieces to that that need to be um, taken back at the grassroots level. And people are starting to do that, though. That's what's exciting about all this. It's happening.
So what is the answer? How can we reclaim our true constitutional liberty? And beyond that, even the liberty that our law form is said to guarantee, because the actual liberties themselves are gifted to us as our free will that God has given to man to live, how we choose. So how do we get back to a law form? What is the solution? I know that the Declaration of Independence says that the power of government is derived from the consent of the governed. And is it necessary for enough people to express that they withdraw their consent from what's happening now, or how can we redeem our republic so that we are once again a constitutional republic, completely with freedoms completely protected by the Bill of Rights?
Great question, Cindy. And my best answer is that people need to understand what some of the nuts and bolts of that enslavement system that I was describing. And I sometimes will call it the Babylonian money magic, or it's a Babylonian type system. And in that system, we're pledged as collateral, and that makes many of the comforts and privileges that we enjoy today possible. And a part of that process is learn to become self-reliant again. There's basically once you've assumed full responsibility, that means that you can't, if you want to stay free, can't abdicate that responsibility by, say, having things taken care of you, in which you enter into contracts in which you gain convenience. And there's all kinds of hooks that will ensnare you. And when I say ensnare you, I mean the entity that's created for you to function under within the system, your all caps name. So we have to become aware of what those things are. And some of them are biggies, like insurance and medical system related things that are the biggest expense to us. My expectation and hope is that now that the American people are in the process of getting their monetary system back, and my understanding is that at some level the Federal Reserve has actually been folded into the United States Treasury, which is still corporate. It's not fully land-based, but there are things that will be possible to unhook from that system, and we will have to learn how to operate under other entities than that so-called straw man or franchise name or all caps name. There's other ways to operate in which you won't be ensnared again. So there's a lot of education that's involved in all of that. And it's not, many people are hoping, I think, that everything will be dissolved magically. I personally doubt if that's going to happen. In other words, all these chains are just going to fall off. I think we need to actively assume individual responsibility, because the way that we were enslaved by becoming surety for the debt was through our ignorance, through trusting leaders who did not have our best interest at heart. Well, in order to get back our true independence, we need to assume responsibility for those things that we abdicated. And there's a lot of learning involved in that process. And there's a lot of information out on the internet. Some of it is private and some of it is public. But if people begin to follow their nose and learn about how to be free, there's a good way to do it, and it's the way that doesn't actually create direct confrontation with the existing system. You want to find the way out that causes the least controversy and the least disruption, because you don't have to become embroiled in conflict. You want to find recourse, and one of the principles of law that even though we have been led to believe certain things, such as America being free, we have learned that, well, we're not as free as we thought that we were. There always has to be within the legal system a way out. Many people learn about common law, then they find out, well, that they've lost standing, so it doesn't apply to them. But even the process of learning about that, you can learn many things that will be very helpful in regaining that lost ground. So this is the counterpart to what happens at the higher levels in the banking system and in the places where the levers of power are maneuvered. There's also, in order to get back that power, there has to be education at the grassroots level, and realizing that you've been manipulated is only a part of the answer. You have to learn how to begin to regain your understanding and of the way that the world has worked, because we don't want a period of chaos in which everything that has been built is chucked out. Now, I'm talking about the whole system that's been built worldwide. We've got obelisks in Rome and in London and in Washington, D.C. that stand for the three centers of global power. That was a coordinated effort that was built over a long period of time. And that's not going to go away in an instant unless, the only way it would go away in an instant is if there would be complete chaos. And we don't want complete chaos. We want a smooth transition away from a centralized control system. So that requires some learning and assumption of individual responsibility. All I can really do now is lay out the general principles and kind of whet people's appetites, but don't expect that there is a magic switch that President Trump can throw and make everything all better. This is a worldwide operation, and President Trump is president of one country coordinating with other countries, but ultimately, to be a free people, the individual responsibility needs to come back down to the grassroots level in every way. And that means there's a lot of learning and a lot of changes in our individual way we do things that has to be rethought. So prepare for that is all I'm saying. We need to do some of the things that were done by our founders, but in a different way. Say, for instance, here's one example. During the Civil War, much of what the international anti-United States forces wanted to do was to create division and get the United States off track, break it up. Well, they actually effectively did that because they stopped the process of reconstruction after the Civil War. If you've studied American history, you learn about Reconstruction as being the period of the carpetbaggers where the North was taking over the South. Well, the long story short is that was actually the beginning of the setting up of the corporate version of America, where you have states of states instead of the organic state of such and such, whatever, joining the Union. So many states never became states in the way that the original states prior to the Civil War became states. I believe that process needs to start again at the local level by people who are no longer bonded surety to the national debt. So there's a lot of factors involved there that do require education. And as we know, the founders of America were very learned men, and at least some of us need to step up our game and get to something close to that level so that we can move this forward.
Well, that's encouraging. It's good to know that there's a way out. And this week there has been kind of a realignment of world powers. We have understood that there was a global plan to unite the world and create a new world order that was somewhat China-centric, and the fact that President Trump was able to achieve the peace agreements in the Middle East that he was able to achieve and sign this week, that the plan to have the New World Order based on a China-centric system is no longer in the forefront, that this peace accord in the Middle East is thought to be the beginning of bringing many nations in the world into peaceful agreements and trade agreements that will benefit the peoples of the nations, and a system that's more based on merit, more of a meritocracy. So as we move through these turbulent times, it seems that deep solutions are emerging, and that a kind of unique era of peace may begin sometime very soon.
Yes, exactly. And I'm really encouraged by those same developments too. And with regard to the Middle East, what is from an economic standpoint going on there is that the previous agreements made by Kissinger under Nixon, when we went off of the gold-based dollar and onto a petrodollar, were that the United States would protect the oil-producing nations if they would denominate all sales of their oil in dollars. So that is, people have been anticipating the death of the petrodollar for a long time. It's happening, and that means we're transitioning to something new. And the counterpart to that change in the Middle East, of course, is the loss of power of China. And as many people have pointed out, a lot of the rise of China, and President Trump has been one of the key people pointing this out, a lot of the rise in the economic welfare of China has been based on false or giving them the status of a developing nation so that they have special advantages. And the plan of the global bankers was to parlay that into global dominance. Well, that's been interrupted, and President Trump is holding China to account and demanding fair trade deals where they don't suck off American industry to the extent that they have been. So yes, the world is getting reworked in an economic way, and it's a matter of actually leveling out the playing field in a playing field that has been rigged for a very long time, with the end game of globalism is being short-circuited by patriots and President Trump. And one of the spiritual principles that I like to think about in this context with regard to getting our power back from these people that at a very high level, global level, have been building this thing is the principle that Jesus talked with about going first to your adversary and settling things out of court, or say short of going to war. You want to deal with things before they, or while you can, at a less disruptive level. And I see President Trump doing that. As much as has been made of him being a bull in the china shop, in fact, he's going about this operation very delicately and regaining what has been given away by previous presidents who have sold out America and not just presidents, but many other people as well. And he's recognizing the adversary, but he's dealing with them wisely. And part of that wisdom is recognizing it's not China as a monolithic nation that's taking over the world. There's a deep state in China, and it's a deep state. There's deep state subterfuge in all nations of significant power and strength. So President Trump has been actually working with leaders in nations across the world to leverage self-interest of those nations, because no nation really wants to be sold out down the road. If somebody thinks they're getting benefit from the financial system, they need to be educated in terms of how that system is actually going to, in the long run, enslave them. So what President Trump has been doing is that kind of educational process that I talked about just previously here. He's been doing that, I believe, with leaders of many countries, including China, so that they once again begin to see the long-term need to operate in the national interest of their own country and not sell out to promises that never turn out to be true by bankers who have cornered the market on the monetary system. So we will return to a world, I believe, in which competition is a good thing that brings out the best in people, instead of a world of monopoly men who can manipulate everyone because they control all of the strings. So we're on the road to free humanity, and I'm excited about it.
As am I. Thank you for all those great comments and insights. We also thank our audience for joining us for this episode of Poli-Psych Podcast. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If you have, we ask that you please click like, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us on BitChute if you are so inclined. Unfortunately, you can't follow us on Twitter anymore because we've been suspended, so please help us out and share the link to our video. We appreciate that very much. Once again, thanks for joining us. If you have a moment, please visit our website, and until next time, take care.